democracy means when you are by the water, but also the role such landscapes will have to shape more open and democratic societies. Those kinds of societies that Friends of the Park builds every day with their advocacy and with their belief on their missions. Public spaces that are for all, that are open, that are accessible, and that encourage expressions from all publics that are diverse, where democracy could bloom. That is also what makes this extraordinary park system unique. When I first came to Chicago, I kept telling people it gave me Barcelona vibes or Rio de Janeiro vibes. But nowadays, after 3 years in this extraordinary city, it's now I know I go around the world and say, it gives me Chicago vibes. It gives me democracy by the water vibes. So today we are here to learn about the amazing kind of long process of articulation of the last 4 miles of the waterfront, a multi-generational process that is 150 years in the making, as the speakers of the day taught me when we first met. Thanks to their passion and expertise, we today are going to enjoy a plan that they had gifted us. They had carefully considered how to extend and complete a continuous road along the shore of the lake for runners, walkers, and cyclists. They had carefully considered how will that create jobs for the community, how will that create diverse and open public spaces, how can that new landscape protect the shore from storms and from erosion. They had considered how to better manage water, different biotopes of aquatic plants, how to restore the dunes and the glacial moraines, how to improve access to the lake and create more beaches and green spaces and public spaces that are accessible to the neighborhoods, and how can they extend as green corridors into the community and become armatures of new urban life for those neighborhoods. So as we enjoy such an extraordinary work, I'm excited and encouraged to also reflect together on what will be the new challenges and what design excellence would mean today for those last 4 miles for the generations to come. And I will say that while they are the last 4 miles of this extraordinary park system, perhaps they are the first of those that will orient other cities and will serve us as an example of best practices for many cities in the United States to follow in the American continent. So what are those new needs for restorations of existing ecologies? What are the possibilities for multifunctional parks and open space? What are those new functions that parks by the lakes could accommodate? Are there new project strategies that could help us address powerful lobbying organizations? Are there landscape strategies that could help us overcome the fragmentation on different kinds of status and levels of protection along the shore? What are the kind of new concerns and strategies to better address biodiversity and extreme weather patterns through a renewed interest on education in the public spaces? Ultimately, I guess one of the most exciting things to ask ourselves is, are there new forms of organization that we had learned through these 150 years of this process that could be reflected on the project strategies to move forward down this path? So thank you very much for inviting me to reflect with you on this. I'll be very brief, and I'll let the experts that had led this process share with you all the amazing work that has been done until now. Thank you so much.
Here we are. I'm Paul Boyd. And I'm Thom Greene. We're a bunch of old guys who worked on this a long time ago. When I moved to Edgewater back in the middle 80s, the water was rising. And the buildings were getting battered and the waves were pouring in and everyone was scrambling, especially in the Edgewater neighborhood, about what do we do about this rising water? A problem that never seems to go away. Groups got together. I was president of the Edgewater Community Council, and you moved to the community in the 80s, a wonderful architect and dreamer. We started making plans. We worked with Loyola University, especially, who also was planning an 18-acre park at Devon in the front of their campus that became an interesting nexus to connect the next mile of Chicago's lakefront. We even had charrettes, and we put on programs that had designs, symposiums, lectures, the Bright New Lakefront lecture series. There was a lot going on. But then the courts struck down the Loyola thing.
And that was 35 years ago that we worked on that, primarily with the Edgewater neighborhood, the next mile we called it.
But then things went on, and it seemed like, we lost our purpose, that, we had hundreds of people involved in this effort that in retrospect was pretty significant, but there was no traction to it. But in 2004 or so, President Bush came to town and Richie Daley got him in an airplane and drove him up and down the lakefront and tried to show him the magnificent lakefront park system, the 26 miles that we had. And President Bush got all excited, and so did Richie Daley. And Richie Daley put out a command, our planning departments should be planning for the completion of the Chicago lakefront. And that was our hope. Then Thom jumped in.
And I met with Mayor Daley with my plans back then. And actually, there was an international competition by the Graham Foundation in 2004 called the 21st Century Lakefront Park Competition that people entered the design for our lakefront pretty much on the north end all over the world. And there was a big exhibit and a big competition for that. And I met with Mayor Daley with my plans in his office. And we thought it was moving along, but everything sort of falls apart and the lake levels went down. Everything's based on lake levels. Once the shoreline is in danger, it's in the news, as it was in the Tribune with the headlines, our lakefront, our jewel, our monster.
Anyway, so that's just a brief overview to get a feel for who we are. Let's go into the history and context of this. Why now? I remember Rahm Emanuel saying, never waste a good crisis. I want to make 4 points. 1, the water levels rise and fall about 7 feet, up and down, all the time. Every 10, 15, 20 years, it goes through its cycle or halfway through its cycle, up and down. And it's been doing this, and they measured it going back 200 years. But when I talked to the state geologist, he said, no, it goes back thousands of years. This level of the lake keeps moving up and down, and it always will. In fact, it may be trending a little upward now with climate change. So keep that in mind. So fact number 1, the water levels always rise at least 7 feet. And it's going to do it again. It's dropped down a foot or 2 right now, but it'll come back up again and it'll start smashing. So my second thought is the lake eats the shoreline. The lake eats the real estate, public and private. That is at the heart of what all this planning has to address. So if you think of this wonderful lake, this beautiful lake that draws us to it, it's also a monster, and we have to plan around it. Thirdly, I want to introduce the concept of revetments. All park planning along the lakefront is made possible by revetments. What is a revetment? It's a French word, ultimately a Latin word that comes from defense. Block it off, buffer it, hold it back. As this amazing city of Chicago started developing after the fire, especially, it was growing at a pace of about 500,000 people every 10 years. It was the fastest growing city in the world for a number of decades into the early 20th century. And we had to protect ourselves from that. The railroads on the south side were complaining that they were getting inundated with the storms. The new buildings, apartment buildings, were getting smashed by waves. And the concept of building out into the lake, an engineered new shoreline out into the lake, 200 feet, 300, 400, in some cases a half a mile, became embedded in the building of the park system. So when you have a revetment, you get your defense. But what you also get is a platform that can hold the parks and the trees and the bushes.
And the bicyclists.
And the pedestrians. And the pedestrians and the children and the picnics, etc. So revetment is an engineered thing. And if you want to be frank about it, the whole lakefront of Chicago, 26 miles of it, is man-made, person-made, engineered, period, with steel, stone, and wood underneath these very natural-looking forms that Mother Nature has taken over. So
right. There is no natural shoreline in Chicago.
You got it. So since the 1870s, we built the first 26 miles of revetment-based beautiful parks. We got 4 miles left, 2 on the north side, 2 on the south side. The 2 on the north side, think it's north of Hollywood. It's inconsistently filled in. And from 71st Street down to the end of the state line is the biggest portion of it, another roughly 2 miles. So that's the key facts you have to know. You know, Burnham wasn't the first person to have ideas about this. There were hundreds of civic leaders, planners, visionaries, neighbors, planning in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s to build parks and to deal with the lakefront. And then it came to a big head when the Illinois Central Railroad said, we can't bring our trains in here because the waves keep eating us. So they demanded, and the city started building out what became Burnham Park. And by 1893, the famous World's Fair, led and administered and managed by Daniel Burnham, built Jackson Park and hosted the fair and became a major infrastructure improvement that solidified so much of the south side. Many civic leaders were involved in this, and it just kept going. Next slide. Oh, let's see. I think I forgot to say next slide last. Okay, that's a good one. Daniel Burnham's plan. I always think we have to show it. You ought to read it. It's a good read. It's really a wonderful book, but it is a very visionary plan, much of which has been accomplished. I estimate 75% of it has been built. There were 6 major themes in it, and I won't go through the whole thing. The major theme was the whole of the lakefront should be covered with parks. And he had intercoastal waterways, et cetera, some of which were built, especially on the north side. You know that, you've seen those, the rowing lagoons, et cetera. There were islands in the lake. But the major jewel of the plan of Chicago from 1909 was to build a total and complete lakefront. Next slide. Look at, how do we do this thing? Let's see, can you, look at that there's, got it? Mm-hmm. Are you seeing something there? Anyway, we're trying to point to what became Northerly Island here. And it's, there you go.
There you go.
All right, just think prototypically. Burnham and Bennett had beautiful drawings by Jules, what's his fame? The great artist, Guerin, building out the concepts. And when I look at the plan of Chicago, I realize in one form or another, about 75% of it has been built. And that's amazing. Not exactly as depicted, but the concepts were laid out. So, what I'd like to say is you need concepts first, and that's the first thing we worked on. Thom and I and a whole bunch of other people were invited by Friends of the Parks in the 2004-2005 period to join a committee that was called the Last 4 Miles Initiative. Lots of lovely people, Irma Tranter, Eleanor Romer, Fred Bates, and there's so many people. If I don't name them all and you're listening, we love you. I can't remember everyone. It was just wonderful. But $400,000 was raised to launch a Last 4 Miles planning effort. It was more or less that number, with a big chunk of it from the Lurie Foundation, and many of the other major foundations in Chicago contributed to it. So we had a budget to hire a part-time staff and also pay for planning, engineering work, studies,
Cost analysis,
engineering, consulting, et cetera. And we loaded the committee with some of the great experts in the city and brilliant architects like Thom and John Benz and so many more. And I'm sorry I'm not mentioning all your names. You know who you are. We had a wealth of pro bono talent thrown in, designers and engineers from everywhere. We even hired ACOM, who does the cost estimating for the Chicago Park District. The Chicago Park District was also very friendly to this effort. Many great board members like Joy Molnar from the University of Illinois and all her contributions, Tom Stark, Maureen Murnane, so many people. We produced a plan. Go ahead.
You can see from the slides there that we had many community meetings in a lot of the neighborhoods out both on the south side and the north side, really getting the input from the neighborhood, which is key to designing our lakefront. Those are little neighborhood parks. At the same time, they're a park for the entire city of Chicago.
Yep. Yeah, we estimate on the north side and the south side, there were up to 100 different meetings with community groups and civic groups over especially the 2 or 3 years leading up to 2009, when the plan was finally published. They were well attended. A lot of the people came out of the woodwork at the end who were opposed to it, but by and large, just about everybody we met with was very enthusiastic, contributed to the plans, added to the designs, etc. Next slide. Here we go. The whole idea is to connect the whole from one end of the city to the other, to get on a bike or get your jogging shoes on or walking shoes and go from the Indiana state line all the way up to Evanston. That is at the essence of it. Burnham insisted that the lake, by its very nature, should always and everywhere be accessible to everyone. I think he was a private socialist in many ways. He didn't believe that private property rights should really be taking away the lakefront from the people. And Daniel Montgomery Ward, et cetera, said that lakefront should always be forever open and free. It's built into the DNA of Chicago. That lakefront is ours. And it needs to be for everyone, rich and poor, and to be able to move up and down it and come into it easily from the west.
I like to call it the heartline of the city. Those 30 miles for biking, walking, and just the mental spirit of being on the lake are key to the city of Chicago and for our health.
So next slide. It's very complex. It's look, these pictures are magnificent. I can't go into detail. This is built, engineered, sand dredging, pumping water, building steel, stone, and wood, pilings, et cetera, creating the new platforms for the parks and the outer edge to protect the inner part of the lake. It needs repair all the time. That's constantly going on. We've just completed a lot of the repairs of the shoreline, which needed repair after 100 years, and there's still more to go. And we also need to finish 2 miles on the north side and 2 miles on the south side.
The key is with these step revetments, which are great protection for the shoreline, but they don't offer you to be able to touch the water. And that's what we have to create as a balance of these stepped revetments and beaches so people can access and get into the water. It's the balance of those two worlds that we need in every neighborhood.
Next slide. Speaking of sand, as Tom was just saying, I don't think it's a good idea to just pile rock like in front of Burger Park here. They piled more rock and then it slipped into the water when the waves beat it and ate it up. You got to build a stronger structure. The best revetment is a beach. Mother Nature's version of defense of a shoreline is sand. And sand drifts along the lakefront in what's called the littoral drift. Up and down from the north to the south, sand is always moving and the wind blows it into the shore and various structures can capture it. And when it's an engineered shoreline, you have to build structures to hold it, like at North Avenue Beach. There's a whole infrastructure underneath, like there's a shovel bent up holding it so that it doesn't drift away. And those beaches are able to be enjoyed by everyone.
That's why you see those steel pilings going out or those little piers going out into the lake. Those are really capturing and grabbing the sand as it drifts from the north to the south.
Yep. And you have to barge in sand to supplement it. You have to truck it in. Well, the sand still keeps moving, even though it's diminishing in the system. That's a whole other story. But there's plenty of sand that you can be retrieved from the lake further south, and that it has been allowed to be brought up to build our beaches. If I had my way, we'd have beaches along the whole shoreline. But anyway, next slide. Okay, let's move on to that.
Besides protecting the shoreline, the next key is to really create natural habitat for aquatic nature and life in there with fish and everything else that comes with it, to create a natural shore for them. At the same time, we're protecting the shore. At the same time, we're creating a place for the city of Chicago to live and ride their bikes and walk.
Love it. The fish love it. And this whole plan has been engineered in such a way that all those thoughts have been worked into the concepts. We had consultants on ecology and fish, et cetera. When you build it, even though it's engineered, Mother Nature takes over. Mother Nature blows the sand around. Mother Nature blows seeds around, and new trees, new dunes develop on the engineered shoreline, so that most Chicagoans to this day don't even know that it's engineered. They think it's natural. And I have to laugh and think, wow, Mother Nature just took it over. Next slide. Let's see.
There's a version of the two shorelines, the concrete shore and the beach shore.
Okay. What it means for Chicago? Yep. I forget what we're supposed to say on this one, but let's go on to the next slide. Okay, we're missing one. Let's hold a minute. There was something I wanted to say. Oh, I see. I finally caught up with the slide. It's worth planning for, because quite frankly, the Shoreline Park system is the #1 attraction to the city of Chicago from around the world. Daniel Burnham was fascinated by all the parks and public monuments and buildings in Paris, and he kept waxing eloquent about how Paris just drew people to it, to tour it, to live there, to visit, to vacation, and so many of them stayed. They created a new wealthy city, a new dynamic city, a city of business and commerce and a center of the world. Chicago shoreline has the same effect. It draws people, all of us, young, rich, poor, everyone wants to be by the lake. So I give you an example. When we get to studying the US Steel site, there's 500 acres at the US Steel site. That could be a new immigrant village, a new refugee village, a new low and modest income neighborhood that would be filled with people coming from all over the world who are drawn to the lakefront. And now it's an empty steel mill along the lake where we have control of the lakefront. So the economic benefits are new businesses, new concessions, new restaurants, new tax base, a gradual increase in property values. And then there's the issue of gentrification. I'm a firm believer that if things are growing gradually, et cetera, you can plan for it and plan ahead to deal with the income levels and the improvements that the public structures give. Okay, what slide are we on? Have any stories about this one, Tom?
Well, the slide on the right is basically, I believe that's option B for the Edgewater neighborhood. That is creating a sort of an island there, and what I like to call a residential lake. So you have a hard shore on the east side, and you have a residential lakes for a soft shore line. So you can have paddle boards, paddle bikes, kids in the water, and not having to deal with the power of Lake Michigan. It's a small residential lake and creating a beautiful park for Edgewater, which is, I think, ranks last in parkland in the city of Chicago.
So next slide. So key principles and concepts of the last 4 miles plan. Number 1, public access along Lake Michigan from Evanston to Indiana. 2, more parkland and beaches, especially in underserved areas and uninvested areas. We know where they are. Number 3, community-based planning effort. This has to be done with the people of the neighborhoods who live and work in there. We tried as best we could, and I think that was an area we really needed a lot of improvement in, to get in touch with the people who live there and what they want. But a good deal of that went on, and I'm very proud that Friends of the Parks is enlisting more and more people to get involved in these processes. 4th, completion of a continuous lakefront path. Everybody wants to run, walk, glide, skate, or bicycle along the lakefront, and it connects to every other bike path around, and keep connecting it. It's a preordained part of our DNA in Chicago that you need to walk along the lakefront. We need greenway corridors to the lake. We need to connect things west to the east. We need more corridors and that welcome people to the lakefront.
That's been my point for a long time, is not only the north and south access along the shore, but the east and west access is key. How are all the neighborhoods going to get to this park? What is their access from east to west? That is primary. Our big key with this is the neighborhood access to this incredible lake.
So the creation of habitat and improvement of the lake to our most important coastal system, all this has been worked into the plan. The engineers worked to attract fish, to protect fish, to spawning grounds, etc. It's all in the plan. The preservation of our cultural history. I love Steelworkers Park as a place to do that. The dedication of the park is to the history of the labor movement and the steelworker factories that were in that area. And though it is still to be built out, it's a memorial to everybody. There's so many other elements of every ethnic group that can be celebrated within the parks. And finally, attention to previous and current open space and greenway planning efforts. We need to connect all these planning efforts to all open space systems in the city. That's an overview. If we can move on to the next part, Tom and I will interact with a more close look at each segment.
It may be hard to read in this, but you can sort of see the light areas are what is existing now, and the dark areas are what is planned in the last 4 miles conceptual project.
Okay, next slide. We're going to start the south end. Where's the how do you do
The cursor,
yeah,
what do you want it?
yeah, down here. Okay, starting at Calumet Park is the bottom end of the city that goes to the state line. It is a beautiful park, finished. But right next to it is the CDF. We want you to see that. And that's the Calumet River in there. Whoops, we're drawing lines on it. Okay. Okay. What are we doing here? There we go. Is this where can you see that? Okay,
And Calumet Park is a beautiful, large park designed by the Olmsted brothers in 1904, a beautiful neighborhood and community park.
mhm.
The idea is to connect that north as much as we can.
So this is the planning area from the CDF, the river, Steelworkers Park and Park 566, and then up here further, there's the 71st to 75th Street. Why don't we go to the next slide? What's that? What do we do?
There, it's gone.
Okay.
So here you can see Calumet Park on the left, and what we had planned back then was an extension almost mirroring Olmsted's design of Calumet Park into the Port Authority property and the CDF site.
So this is the controversial pile of sludge, and I'm reminded I gave a presentation at this very point in the parking lot in Calumet Park, where I pretended Daniel Burnham seized my brain, and he was really pissed off. He said, what a bad idea to put a poisonous sludge site from the dredgings of the river right on the river's mouth, across from a water filtration plant, and right on the edge of the lake, so that it can leak into the lake. He was really pissed off. I believe he visits me in my dreams sometimes. That's why they call me crazy. But anyway, you get the idea. Now we're into Steelworkers Park. That is actually a work in progress. All of this CDF and Steelworkers Park are controlled and owned by the Park District in the city of Chicago. We already have possession of them, though they are not yet fully developed. Steelworkers Park is developing beautiful new prairies, but the edges aren't done according to the plans that we had. We had a small lagoon in it. We had, making, going along the river, being able to walk along the river, and also keeping where the ore ships would dump off the ore to the factories. That feature would be kept and designed around as part of a public amenity. It's currently used as a magnificent fishing area.
And we have 300 feet that have been dedicated to the city of Chicago along that steel site there.
So we already own the edges. Now let's go on to the next slide that, okay, where are we?
So now you can see how the new park, the 300 feet along the steel site, connect up to the rain.
Finishing the section on the south side. This is the area from 71st to 75th, which I will observe is the only area of private property right up to the lakefront. And in fact, there was a lot of controversy for those who live east of South Shore Drive as to how to develop that area, if at all. So we developed plans that involved a simple, close to the shoreline, so to connect South Shore Cultural Center to Rainbow Park, so that a path or walkways could go through, and a more elaborate one that involved peninsulas out into the lake that would provide a buffer zone little lagoon that the bicycle path could go around and further away from the private property, and then connect with South Shore Cultural Center.
And a residential lake. So the shoreline at the buildings there along the shore is a soft shoreline. The hard shoreline is on the far east. So giving those private residents their own space and their own apron onto the lakefront and creating a softer shoreline for them so they don't have a hard edge revetment.
Next slide.
This was another option for that.
Oh, this is a
section.
version, the simpler version of it, the hugging the shoreline without the lagoon build.
With a small neighborhood beach.
Next slide.
So we're going back here to the Calumet Park. This was the idea to basically mirror the image of that park, take some of the property from the Port Authority, which I said before that they have grown over the last 14 years, and they take up more of that Port Authority land. But the key is to really try to utilize the CDF site. It's a very tight little triangular sliver to have a connection with Calumet Park. But this is what we're trying to do to create more of a passive park for Calumet Park. Most of their park right now is active baseball diamonds. This was to create a passive park with picnics and pavilions and a lookout tower for the river and what's happening there. And this all came from a community meeting and a charrette we had at the south side.
And the whole idea also was to build it in such a way that eventually a bridge could be built to go high enough over the Calumet River to connect the bicycle paths from the whole south end all the way to the north end. That's why I say this is one of the most critical missing piece in the south side that really needs to be fought for.
Next slide.
Let's shift to the north side. Again, similarly, there's a couple of miles more or less not developed with continuous park. Starting at the south end, do we have the ability to, what do we do?
Starting at the south end, up at Osterman Beach.
Here's the end of Lakeshore Drive is the way most people think of it, Osterman Beach. There's little parks along Sheridan Road in between the buildings, but there's nothing there right up to the water's edge. We lost it. Okay. Where are we?
So we're at Osterman Beach and the extension of that connecting up to Burger Park and then further up to Loyola University. And this was scheme one of it, to create a soft shoreline, creating at least 30 feet. Remember, these buildings, somewhat like the south side there, these high rises are right up to the shoreline with a concrete wall right up to the shoreline there. The idea is to connect it up to Burger Park and give them their own beach and their own extension of their park and their world, but to connect it further to Loyola University that for years has been trying to create more of a park in front of their university there, because primarily right now it's all just rock revetment, their whole shoreline, I believe is.
Yep. I got lost in the slides. Where are we?
This is a different plan for we're at Lane Beach or Osterman Beach up to Burger Park. This was again the idea of creating a residential lake and a little peninsula to connect up to Burger Park. Again, that residential lake is for paddle boards, kids, paddle bikes, a softer edge all the way around it, creating what I call a residential lake, which is typical with what Burnham was trying to do, but on a much more grander scheme.
Next slide. This one portrays a simple version. Let me get my
Up to Evanston.
up to Evanston. So this would be north of Loyola Park in Rogers Park, where there's a few sporadic street end beaches that have now been overwhelmed by the water and since mostly filled up with rubble stone rock to protect the shoreline. We thought a better version would be to build it out 50 to 100 feet at least, or maybe more, to have simple beaches. The simple plan involves a thin stretch of buffering parkway, park-like green space with 2 or 3 small little beaches scattered in there. That is the simple and less expensive plan. I will observe that I think it's a good idea to spend more money to develop a permanent solution than to wait for the next 7 to 20 year cycle to eat away at the last solution. Putting rocks along the shoreline, though needed, isn't the ultimate solution. If you can do that for 5 million, maybe for 10 or 12 million, you can get a park out of a stretch here and there.
And the key in Rogers Park was to keep it minimal and as natural as possible for their shoreline, but at the same time protecting their structures.
Next slide. This one shows the same area north of Loyola Park up to the city limits that involves, it's a more expensive version. It involves bigger beaches. And again, beaches are better revetments if the money is available, wouldn't you rather have a big beach rather than a small beach? But the shoreline would be protected all the way up to the city limits and join the Evanston protective systems that they have along their lakefront, though I have to jokingly say it's mostly stones. I think they could do better than, and we're an example of our Chicago park system is much more beautiful.
And these are a little different designs rather than just having the groin go out to grab the sand. We work with the lake geologist, and these are what are called beach cells that help to grab the sand and contain the sand. That soft gray area you see out in the water there are submerged rocks to create the beach cell to keep the sand there. So we work with a lot of engineers and geologists to come up with this design of the beach cells.
This is a good time to comment. When we did this concept plan, we did it in such a way that the engineering issues would already have been approved by the State Geological Society, that the orientation and structure addressed all the state and county and city levels. The Park District reviewed these plans and basically said, these are fine. They are concept plans, but if someone wants to build them as is, they're essentially ready to go into design phase. We also realize they're also used to create discussion, and you get what you can get. You get something smaller, you get something bigger, but these plans have already met engineering and cost specifications done by the experts that were on our committee that are usually the ones that are consulted by the city of Chicago when they build anything.
And remember, for every design of this lakefront, every 3 blocks is a whole different story and a whole different design parameters, and it's a whole different world. You can't just put a blanket design up and down the shore. Every neighborhood's different, every access is different, every public and private section are different. So everything's got to be designed specifically for each neighborhood and how they're going to access it.
All right. We're going to end here, but I just want to say this is the most important thing. And everyone asks, how much is this going to cost? Well, we cost it out with the help of AECOM, who does the consulting for the Park District on the cost of all the projects along Lakefront. And in 2009, the range of cost was $350 to $450 million. If you want to break it down into the south and the north side, the south side had the biggest portion of it. I think it was either 270 million to 330 million, depending on whether the simpler or more complex plan was chosen.
Approximately 400 acres on the south.
Yep, plus or minus 400 acres. And on the north side, it was 80 million to 120 million, depending on which alternatives were closed, which was either side of 100 new acres of parkland. The total for the projects, as we said, was 350 to 450. The question becomes, well, it's not 2009 anymore. What would this cost today? And I'll say, all I can do is give a guesstimate. I'm not a cost estimator, but I will observe that I study this stuff. I hear the cost of everything. I know what the rebuilding of Lakeshore Drive North is going to cost because I know how to ask the engineers questions and they let me know privately that that's going to be a $3 billion project. I also can observe that Millennium Park costs $475 million. And I can observe that about 20 to 25 years, over the last 20 to 25 years, we've spent $2.5 billion on improvements around the center city. So when we say, okay, I'll say, let's double it. So let's say we got a cost of 450, let's say 900. We deserve it. The south side is underinvested in, the north side is underinvested in, the upper north side. The center city gets all the money. The new highway project is going to cost $3 billion. $2 billion of it is going for the downtown portion. And that's lovely, but let's be fair, let's be equitable. I'm going to stop my.
Well, I was going to say the key is to get a plan, get consensus with the neighborhoods in the state of Chicago, and be in line and be ready. Once there is money, to have a plan and be ready to go. That's the key, and get consensus with the city. So I know there's a lot of different questions with this. We've worked on this I think it was 14 years ago this was put together. So we'll wait to for the next section and all your questions. Thank you.
Okay, can I be the first person, like, to have a question? So I live in between 71st and the 75th Street. And as you know, those, properties, there are private ones, right? So I heard so far, and also from your presentation, that you plan there to build either, a beach, which will, be close, to the property, or some, lagoon stuff, like something like that. In either case, there is something that is called the private property, and particularly of my building, extends 15 to 20 feet into the lake. So if you build something close to the shore, you will be building on the private, property of my building. Considering that the laws in this state are not very precise, on the water, edge and where private public stops, there is a huge concern over whose property that will be, that you build something onto. And the second, probably more important question is what I still haven't heard, is that do you have any funding to do any of this? And if you plan to get funding, from where that funding will come. So that is of crucial, importance for us to know, because there will be definitely a protest and this, agreement, on the South Shore, like to any building close to the private, property. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for jumping in. I do want to let everyone know we haven't formally started our Q&A section. We do want to hear from everyone, so this is great. I will say we are trying to mobilize, engage, and inspire our city of Chicago to get behind this vision, not maybe these exact plans, right? We did this community charrettes and community planning back in 2006 to 2009. And the world has changed and our interests have changed. So we are seeking to sort of re-bring this to the attention of much of the public. It has never left the attention of Friends of the Parks and many of our advocates and members, but to try to restart the discussions, both to search for that funding and also to see what are the plans and the visions that people would have today to create this space. And I could use that maybe just to give a very quick, we think about what's happening today and updates. One of the major things that's different now than in 2006 or 2009 is the money that's coming from both the city and the federal government to do the erosion study that many of you have heard of, that $3 million, to really look at how we protect our shoreline. That creates new political opportunities for future funding and planning, but that study is over the next 3 years. So this is long-term engagement, mobilization, and inspiring and connecting with community that Friends of the Parks has never stopped doing, but we're now returning that energy back towards the Last 4 Miles initiative. I can say we know that work really focuses on South Shore, Edgewater, and Rogers Park, but also we've continued to be engaged with the CDF site and work going on at Southworks. As Paul and Tom mentioned, there has been some development, right? We've seen the new parkland at Steelworkers Park and at 566, which shows us moving towards this vision, but it's not yet complete. And the CDF site, we still continue to be in conversation and advocating with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to close that site and turn it into a park. And we're currently in disagreement about that. And that's been where we've been most publicly engaged in all of this vision. But as was stated, each of these areas is going to take different community engagement, different advocacy strategies, and different political will. But as you said, we are still casting this vision. We're not yet ready to start building today. And we then, in casting that and in doing our political advocacy, we are looking for that funding and also the connection with community to help direct us forward. I want to also, now we have a couple of folks who are environmental leaders who have joined us today from the Alliance from the Great Lakes and the Illinois Environmental Council. If you could go to that slide, please, Julie, so we can see who our speakers are. I want to let them respond. And I know there've been questions in the chat around things like the rising water levels. And I know that like Joel Burnham is here and he can help. He's wrote some answers in the chat, but can also help give some insight to some of those questions we asked. So I'll invite Joel to start us off with a quick comment.
I'm sorry, I don't think that my question was, responded to. I was asking, do you already have any funding aside to the $3 million, dollars that the city has to deal?
And we do not.
Erosion, and that is for the whole city, $3 million. That is not just, for the South Shore or just, for the North Shore. So $3 million is for the whole city. So are you, aware that the Chicago Park, district, received just $5, million to deal with the, erosion process? If you are not aware, I passed in the chat extract from that motion. It's here, and also the particular snippet. Complete one that
we really appreciate you wanting to ask us a question, but we do want to go to our panelists and have some others' responses. I do feel like we answered a little bit of your question, but we can come back to that. I apologize, Joel. We'd love to throw it to you to give us a response.
I'll keep it quick because I know there's a lot of experts here, and I want to make sure there's enough time to ask more questions. Thanks for asking me to be here. I just want to say up front, I will not speak to like specifics of the Chicago lakefront situation. I'm going to try to speak really just as a Great Lakes expert as much as I can, and just make a couple of quick points. One, going back to the some of the root causes of the challenges the shoreline is seeing today. And the panelists or the speakers alluded to this earlier. Water levels go up, water levels go down. They will continue to do so. Probably the movement between extreme lows and highs is going to become more frequent. And those changes are going to happen faster than they have in the past as a result of climate change. The second thing is that models over the last 20 years have indicated anything from long-term average declines in the average water level of Lake Michigan to what today is seen as a better chance of a long-term increase in the average water level. This is all based on climate models that try to predict future precipitation patterns and evaporation and surface temperature patterns. So there's the potential for a few inches for the average high water level to go up a few inches, which of course creates more stress on the shoreline. I will just say that Chicago's in a unique position here because of the extent of the public shoreline relative to the rest of the Great Lakes. But dozens of other Great Lakes communities are dealing with these same challenges and are thinking about how to take advantage of the fact that some kind of investment in shoreline resilience needs to happen now, and to do that in a way that maximizes both the public benefit and also recognizes the need to make all properties, public and private, more resilient to changing water levels. So that's a good thing. However, I want to offer just a note of caution about the water levels issue, and that is that, and I think this was again mentioned briefly by the presenters. Concern about water levels tends to go up really high when the water is really high, and then it sort of evaporates, so to speak, from the public consciousness when the water levels go down again. And so we saw that for the period from the late 90s to the mid 2010s. Getting anybody's attention about high water in the western part of the Great Lakes region was really difficult. So I encourage everybody to think about this as responding to water levels and making the shoreline more resilient, especially with the potential of using some nature-based solutions, even though I know the shoreline is artificial here in Chicago. Dealing with the water level dynamics is one part of this, but it shouldn't be the only part at all, because, and that's why I love to hear some of the multiple benefits that are being talked about in this plan, because the public and political attention to the water levels issue does tend to drop pretty soon after the water level starts to go down. I want to note just a couple of things about, people have talked a lot about funding. I do want to recognize another kind of bigger Great Lakes issue that I think has implications for this city and for this topic. And that's that there's been a lot of work and funding going into cleaning up some of the most contaminated areas in the Great Lakes over the last 20 years. I'm sure many people are familiar with the program, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is the largest watershed restoration program in the country, and is currently delivering about $350 million a year to the Great Lakes region. There is some talk, I would say, certainly from me and from others, about the need to look at the next generation of what's needed in the Great Lakes region. And one topic that's on the front of people's lips a lot is this issue of coastal restoration and coastal resilience. And so I wanted to raise that because I think there's a good track record for the Great Lakes region bringing funding into the region. And there is an opportunity, or there will be opportunities, I think, to talk about how to shift some of that funding towards dealing with these coastal realities that, frankly, the Great Lakes, compared to the Marine Coast, the Great Lakes just haven't kept up on investment and sort of innovative thinking about how to manage our shorelines for the realities of the next 100 years. And so I just want to encourage people to know that there's a push for looking for new authorizations and funding to deal with coastal resilience issues. I saw the note in the chat about forgetting about water levels. I appreciate that. Me neither, Linda. I think about it all the time. But it does tend to fade from memory in the general public's mind, unfortunately. I think, trying to shift that conversation to being about managing for highs, managing for lows, and everything in between, so we can have healthy shorelines for everybody. That's where we need to go. I'm going to stop there because I know we're limited on time, and I want to make sure that our friends from IEC have a chance to respond as well. Thanks for making me part of this conversation.
Thank you so much for that. I'd love to invite Ayanna and Kimberly to offer us maybe a little briefer than you were thinking response to the presentation today.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I'm Ayanna Simba with the Illinois Environmental Council. And really, I'm looking at it from a perspective of where is shoreline erosion happening, right? Like, we see not only things that are happening north, we see stuff that's happening in the South Shore. We're not only affecting people's condominiums, but also affecting literally DeSable Lakeshore drives. We're talking about people's livelihoods and transportation routes being affected. So I think when we talk about shoreline erosion, we also have to think about just the overall impact beyond just the impact on nature and having open space, but these are threats that literally can affect the economy in Chicago. I'm going to be pretty brief. So, one of the things that IEC we are really pushing for is reestablishing the Department of Environment. And how does that connect to shoreline erosion? I think having a central location where, one, it makes it easier for the community to engage in the city on the shoreline erosion, but then two, also having agencies that are coming together to actually, not only being able to seek out funding, right? We have CDOT, we have the Park District, we have MWRD, we have all these different players, and they're all in these fragmented sections. And I think having a Department of Environment where we have a central place not only to plan, to advocate for funding, but then also for a place for community to engage will be really important. Sorry if that's a little scattered. I just trying to wrap up what I thought was going to be 15 minutes into like 2 minutes. But really our push is, shoreline erosion. Okay, thank you, Linda. I'm glad some people support it, but just the importance of having a Department of Environment and how that can help us improve the shoreline and utilize nature-based solutions. But I'll pass it over to Kimberly.
Hi, everyone. I am the Chicagoland Conservation Manager at the Illinois Environmental Council. And so I know that you all are probably also thinking, how does nature-based solutions kind of fit in here? And then also there is just another part to communities being impacted from this. I think that completing the last 4 miles would be helpful because it is a nature-based solution. It is a nature-based solutions way of us being able to have far and reaching impact. So if we are able to complete the last 4 miles, I think that would help mitigate some of the stormwater that is going out into the inner city. So we have inner city communities such as Brighton Park and West Edelson and McKinley Park and even Inglewood that are being impacted by flooding. And so I think that if we are using some of that nature-based solutions to have parks and things like that along the lakefront, that green infrastructure would help with with absorbing some of that water and making it less impactful at the shoreline, but then also allowing some of our stormwater infrastructure to be not as slammed by the water that's coming in. But most importantly, I would like to say that when we think of stormwater flooding, like in the city, it's not just like buildings being, eroded. It's like people's basements backing up and local flooding. And I think this is happening in some of the poorest neighborhoods. And also when we think about erosion, we have to think about it's a it's a Chicago refinery, not a refinery, but it's a storage facility that's on the lake. And there are concerns that erosion to this area, to this building, would cause some of the toxic chemicals and things that are being stored over there to kind of leach into the river, which is another environmental justice issue. So I think that things like this are really important and critical for us to consider and make sure that we are supporting.
Thank you all for offering sort of initial first response and kind of review of the plan, and also answering so many of the questions that came through the chat. But we do want to make some space for other community comments. I've appreciated folks have even been saying, things like insurance levels are going up was a recent comment. And I know my colleague Julie has been tracking some of your questions and discussion points. Oh, and someone has said they'd like to ask a question.
Is that okay? I know that there were other questions in the chat, but well, first I want to say thank you for pulling this together and presenting. It's great to have this type of discussion. I know that this is a brief time, so it's not going to be enough time to really get into all of the detail, but I'm Juliet Durbin and I'm a member of the Southside Lakefront Erosion Task Force. I live in South Shore, and I know that I've been researching this as well over the last several years to really understand the complexities and how not all of the areas of interest are equal in terms of their needs. And I think it is also really important to clarify that this area between 71st and 75th isn't landfill. It is one of the only remaining natural parts of the shoreline to exist. The rest of the city, the 26 miles, is largely landfill, but this area is not. And so when we talk about nature-based solutions, we are very interested in those. And I think that when we look at the plans, we talk about parks and trees and things like that, but landfill is not entirely nature-based. And I guess my question, so that leads me to largely my question. I'm curious about this effort to add more landfill when the existing areas of the shoreline that have been filled in are dealing with such degradation and erosion already, and that so much of the hard space, the hardened infrastructure that's been developed over the years is deteriorating and needs more money than is available, and that parkland and sand in the existing 26 miles is being run off. So I'm curious about a new effort to add more landfill when we have so many needs already. That's mainly my question.
There's never enough money. But the need for this will never go away. I have come to accept that natural shorelines, when you build a city right up to it, literally within the first few feet of it, the lake just doesn't care. It wants to overwhelm it, move through it, over it, into it. It just does its thing. So the engineered shoreline that we have has to be repaired. I think we have to think in terms of 150 to 200 years, because we've been doing this for 150 years. And we can't just think of the crises that occurred this decade. The grander plan does say that a certain amount of the investment of the city of Chicago is also tied to the value of being in Chicago, namely that we can use the lakefront and get to it, and that it protects us from the rages of the lake. So that's not an answer. It's a fundamental attitude.
It's actually not an answer, but I understand your perspective.
I also think this would be a great time to have Maria Villallobos, who is our moderator and a landscape architect, and who's looking at international approaches to addressing climate change. What does this work look like today and in the future, as opposed to how it has been done in the past? Be a great time for Maria to bring some of her perspective forward. Thanks for the question, Juliet. I think it's a good one.
Thank you, Juanita. It's such an important question, Juliet. I will say that, and you know, the speakers and responded this, that there is never enough money. At the same time, it might not be a question of money. And it's, in a way, it's so much resources needed that at some point it turns around and it's a question of ideas. Lakefronts, ocean fronts, river fronts. We cities have a particular relationship with water. As extreme weather increases and water levels continue to change, it's not a choice. It's not a choice where to invest. In other ways, it's not a question of either or. Do we maintain or do we continue the work? In a way, the maintenance in the long run of the rest of the existing shoreline will be better managed from a financial point of view and a biodiversity point of view if they work together as a community, if that makes sense. The approach to waterfronts expands in that way nowadays, that at the same time, there is a particular point of view that I think is the kind of mindset of the master plan. I'm more familiar with landscape projects around tropical cities, for example, Rio de Janeiro. If you look at Rio de Janeiro and the way the waterfronts had been managed and built over time, you see the kind of different paradigms of how we actually get these projects done. From projects that are entirely community-based to others that are entirely run by governments. So perhaps it's not only continuing and developing this phase, right, which will make the rest of the waterfront more resilient, but also is an opportunity to develop new ways of implemented projects where the community has where the neighbors have a more leading role, more structural role, that then will serve to inform the transformations that are needed in the rest of the system. It's like an ecosystem, it continues informing each other. I also will take this opportunity to say that what we need the most is to be trained and educated to do this. So I will also take this opportunity to invite you all to join us in the Master in Landscape Architecture and Urbanism at IIT. It's the only program in Master in Landscape Architecture serving the city of Chicago, and in a city that needs us this much as we had seen today. You know, we need to train the future generations and encourage the future generations to earn expertise on how to manage our landscapes, our living landscapes, our urban living landscapes, which is a particular kind. Where do we find the resources? I think before we ask ourselves that question, perhaps a more interesting one is how are the strategies of the project new that they don't make us wait for governments to implement them? How can we get started by ourselves? Is that possible at this scale? Not at all. Maybe somewhere in between. And that's what I find so fascinating, the work of Friends of the Park, because it asks precisely that question. What is our role to enact such projects in ways that could further inform how to restructure the rest of the lakefront? So that's kind of my takeaway. And thank you so much for that presentation and that knowledge and those extraordinary proposals that are living part and are continuously constructing a better Chicago. So that was super exciting for me to see and to hear everybody's comments about it.
There have been, thank you for that. Thom, did you have something to add to that?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, since what Joel said, that the lake levels are going to change even more drastically in our lifetime here. And our job one here is really to protect the lakeshore and the buildings is job one. And instead of just dumping a bunch of large boulders on the shoreline, let's plant it and create a park and create everything for the neighborhoods and for the entire city. At the same time, we protect the shoreline and these buildings. That's the key.
So there have been some questions in the chat about why has this project been stalled or rejected before? And since it has been, what, I'm kind of combining a few questions. So, but because it's been rejected before, what is a compromise of ideas now? What are some new things that we could add to maybe work together to get this to actually either get some footing, or what would make it actually productive with everything updated now? And our panelists or Maria, please jump in.
We can get it started. I think part of the answer to that is who gets those changes started. I will say that one of the first, installations in the world. I don't want to get political and describe all the sort of disparities and interests and land values and all that kind of stuff. I think it's probably more I will be more interested, more curious to see if there is a place within that space, that a stretch of lakefront, where protection of biodiversity can start happening. What are the kind of smaller consensus that we can get? What are the areas of consensus that we can get so that the results are so positive that inspire everybody to overcome the larger barriers, right? If that makes sense.
May I add that I think it's a great time, Juliet, for community to discuss this, because we've heard from folks in South Shore that they have a crisis on their hands. But if you fight for your riparian rights, you also get to be the ones who pay for the solutions, right? And so that's the current way it works, right? So how does that change? I don't know, right? But the public, the park district, I know there's been some questions about the park district coming in to do something there, but in fact, that is not what will happen, because it is private land, that the park district does not have the authority to provide the help that homeowners are looking for, right? So the question is that that's actually legally the case. They cannot. They
well,
will
actually,
not.
no, well, we've been partnering and we don't have time to get into it now, but we should really talk, because it's, and like I said, the whole initiative there, there's so many areas of complexity that to focus on South Shore as the entirety is not fair. It's like there are more. We support, we completely support the Calumet Park, the US Steel site, those types of things. I think that we just have to make sure we listen to the community as well.
Right. I think we agree with that. I think we've been very clear that we have been actually spending most of our time in the other parts of the work in recent years. But we talked to the park district too, and as recently as last week, they were very clear that federal dollars cannot come in and fix your problems.
So we're not asking for that. We're asking for public support. For the public roadways that intersect with the lake.
Well, so there are funding questions there, right? And so we think this is that time, because as the city is looking for federal dollars to do the lakeshore erosion work, but that's not how federal dollars are used. So this is a time to talk about what are potential real solutions. That is exactly what we're here doing, having invited a broad swath of folks to help think about what there means. There is a question about, is there money from the infrastructure bill that's already in place? Somebody sent me that privately. There are $3 million that have been put into a shoreline erosion study. 1.5 million came from the federal government. 1.5 million was matched by the city to do a study, which will take 3 years. They are looking at federal assets. This is what the park district has made clear to us. The federal emphasis is on federal assets that will be impacted by lakeshore erosion in that study. there is not a bunch of other federal money already put in place, except for projects that had already been authorized under a very long time ago set of interventions that are now working on Promontory Point and Morgan Shoal as the end of that project. But it won't be till after this 3-year study that then there will be more strategies that the government will go through their own process of public outreach, which always has great limitations. So this is a great opportunity in the run-up to that for communities like South Shore, like the folks that called us from the north side to say, help, lake in our basement, lake in our garage, what does this mean, what do we do? To be thinking about how to engage these questions. So this is exactly what needs to be done. And again, Juliet, I think you put some important questions and things that we have same concerns about concrete revetments, for example, versus nature-based solutions.
If I can add to that, Juanita, because, for example, the question of flooding, right? The question of flooding, yes, the lakefront has its own issues, but at the same time, it's a systemic one. For example, as we look at the Inglewood Trail as an agro trail, we're also looking at the territory of those 2 miles of a trail as a large green flow managing infrastructure that will improve the flooding conditions in the entire neighborhood, right? In Bronzeville, the Bronzeville Trail Task Force is also looking at the trail, the 1.5 mile trail that goes from State Street to the lake as a large water infrastructure, flooding management infrastructure. In other words, the flooding issues that we see spread out have to do not only with what we do along the lake, along the edge of the lake, but also what we do along the armatures in place, sort of perpendicular systems to collect that water and redirect that water. And none of those projects either have enough resources, right? I think one cool thing will be to identify pilot projects that can make things start happening in the real life, right? In my so it would, like, I'm not sure exactly what are the territories, Julia, that you are interested in, but in my experience, starting with a limited pilot project, it's easier to raise resources and create consensus around those. So I'm happy to talk offline on if I can be of any help.
Well, and I would like to add, kind of building off of what Juanita said, we do see each of the different communities that are impacted by this proposal and concept as having unique needs. And we have sought at Friends of the Parks to stay in communication with those communities at all times through our PACs, through our outreach and engagement. It might not always be the most public facing piece of our work. It doesn't mean we're not engaged in trying to be in conversation. We're hoping to reignite and reconnect with some folks at this time. I wouldn't describe this as stalled. I would describe it as this is, we talked about that the whole lakefront, this has been being built over almost 200 years. So instead, we're seeing it as change takes time and these kind of plans take time. And so we've been continuing to slowly continue to work on it over the long term, and we'll continue to have these discussions and bring community together about this. And so really excited for everyone that came today to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah. May I just add to it? I mean, part of why we wanted to have this conversation at this time is the number of people that have called us saying help, or we're working on this. We heard you are too. Illinois Department of Natural Resources is interested in this and funding others to think about shoreline investments and shoreline solutions. And so there's a convergence of energy and attention that has not been present over the last few years, that has happened in part because we've now been through some extreme lake incidents that are expected to continue, as we've heard, not just because of high lake levels, but also because of more frequent and severe storms. And the fact that there's this bipartisan infrastructure deal that promises a bunch of infrastructure investment, right? And the nature of advocacy is that often these things take many years until one of those perfect storm moments comes, right? And we're kind of there now, right? In the anticipation, knowing that the city finally is kicking off their study, right? And we know that they're interested in things like Lakeshore Drive, DeSable Lakeshore Drive, right? So do sinkholes in South Shore Drive end up figuring into what they want to do in South Shore and what they decide? And do they do that with community engagement, or do they just make a plan and come tell the community what they're gonna do, right? And unless there's a whole bunch of engagement, knowing that that may come down to think about what you want there as opposed to what the Army Corps might tell you is going to happen. This is the chance to think about that together, right? So it's an unusual moment, and that is part of the ebb and flow of the policy and advocacy work on long-term projects, is identifying those moments to leverage the energy that is happening because of these convergences that we are experiencing now. So this is the work. So thanks to all who are saying, what do we do? Well, this is the beginning, right? The beginning of re-beginning, conversations that take a long time.
I would just like to say, if the last 4 miles project were built today, every adjacent neighborhood in the city of Chicago would say, boy, why didn't we do this earlier? This is incredible. What a city we live in.
And I'll also observe that we had a lot of support during those 3 to 4 years of community meetings. It was only in the last months that opposition came out. And we came to the realization that we didn't have serious enough conversations, especially in the areas of, private ownership up to the lakefront in East Edgewater, east of Sheridan Road, and in the 71st to 75th Street. It wasn't so much rejected, it was stopped and paused. And they made us stop and pause. And we realized, and I think the work that Friends of the Parks has been trying to do is re-engage the community at a more community basic level. And that's maybe something we weren't as good at in the day. It doesn't say the plan wasn't loved by, we had surveys professionally prepared up and down the city where 75% of the people who reviewed the plan said, love it, build it. There were even attempts at referenda to get it built in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. It wasn't rejected, it's paused.
Well, and I guess we should say, I've seen in the chat, we should not speak for anyone else. Each neighborhood is different and the communities are different. And our goal is to try to engage and then create these conversations all across the city, knowing that even block to block, some of the conversations and perspectives will be different. So we're not trying to, it's hard to talk about a whole citywide project and then not sometimes to feel like, Thom and Paul live in Edgewater. So they're really speaking from their experience as residents there. So hold that intention as you're listening to. But we expect this to be different and to materialize differently and want to engage and continue talking all across the city. We thank you all for staying with us because we know we had our tech issues of losing our internet here at our main site. We really apologize about that. It's the problem of Zoom. It's so much easier when we can be in person. But we're also glad that we're able to make this work during this time of pandemic and public emergency that does continue, and to be the best, safest as we can be, and also make it accessible as you're calling in from wherever you are. We want to share just real quick a couple announcements. Julie, if you could go to the next slide. Real quick, we're doing a whole series this summer for the Netsch lecture themed redesign. And so we'll be talking about the natural nature's edge and deep paving. We want to do some live rock drawing tours along the lake. So we'd love for you to keep an eye out for those programs in July, August, and September, and even maybe in June to join us again virtually or in person. And one more slide, Julie. We also want to share that the Nature Conservancy, can you show me the Nature Conservancy slide, Julie? The South Shore Nature Sanctuary is having its 20th anniversary on June 25th from 1 to 4. And we'd love to invite folks to come out. This isn't the slide, Julie. It's, I don't know which one it is. So we'd love to invite you and just raise that for you, that there is an opportunity to come to South Shore and honor that nature sanctuary and enjoy it with all community, again, on June 25th in the afternoon from 1 to 4. So thank you all for being here today. We also have a slide of contact information to reach out to myself and to Julie Malnak, our policy associate. And thank you all so much for being with us today. And we're going to share this recording with all of you as well after the event. So thank you so much. And we hope you'll be in continued conversation with us about the needs of your communities and where you live and the concept of plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.